Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to speak here. And as advertised, I'm coming from the hardware angle. I'm wearing two hats today. So one is the open source imaging initiative. We do hard and software for imaging devices, so not only MRI, but mainly MRI. And the other is the Just Transition Center, where we focus on the overarching meta questions like legal issues and property questions, governance, and so on. Oop. Yeah, so the talk will be focused around the leading question, who should own healthcare? And once we found an answer to the question that satisfies us, how far can we take that claim in practice? So we're going to talk about these machines, these room-filling scanning devices that you might have seen. It's the most powerful imaging technique that we have around in medtech because it doesn't use any ionizing radiation. You can scan as many times as you want to. You can see soft tissue and so on. But it also comes at a price. So we are usually talking about 1 million euros per Tesla. Tesla is the unit for the magnetic field. And these things have usually like 1 to 3 Tesla. Plus then the maintenance about it, and it's just very expensive. And it also reflects on the global distribution of MRI. So in the global north, you see a lot of dark green and green, it's available, and then as soon as it goes south, you see a lot of light green or no data at all. And also when you dig into the numbers, why we can, and we also should have a debate about the distribution of imaging technology in the global north, as soon as you go south, these numbers quickly drop to 0. So there's not a distribution issue, it's a providing issue, so to say. Yeah, and this is also partly because of the supply. There's 3 main companies dominating the MRI supply in the world. And that is also one of the reasons why MRI technology hasn't gotten any cheaper in the last 40 years. And since 2 of these 3 top dogs are European, a little side blow on the Eurostec debate. If you buy European, or if you reduce the debate on that, you're just going to replace your vendor lock-in with a domestic one. And that's also what happened in MRI. So the founder told me that they were developing PCBs for €5 costs, but they were selling them for 400 because they had this medical device stamp on them, and because there's only 3 suppliers. So if you really want to make healthcare resilient, accessible, and democratic, then you have to make it open source. It's the only way to go. It's not enough to make the machine cheaper. You need to make it open source. And so that's what we did. This is a look into the bore. This is the very first prototype that we replicated in Berlin, and you see it's on wheels. It doesn't look much as an imaging device or like a medical device at the moment, or in this version, because it was really just like lots of cables, easily accessible. But the next version, or that we already have built, has these neat surfaces that it can wipe and looks a lot more like hospital, but the technology is essentially the same. Some technical specifications, so it has 50 millitesla, that's a lot lower than the usual systems, and with that also comes the limitation of what we can scan at the moment. So you can put anything in there with 30 centimeters in diameter maximum, so that's enough for your head or your limbs. But the big innovation that you've seen in the picture is it's mobile, it's on wheels. The scanner comes to the patient and not the other way around. And it can, in principle, also be battery powered. The entire system runs on 12 volts, so you could put it into an ambulance or wherever. And apart from that, one of the main things is, of course, the obscenely low material costs. So you can replicate the system for about 20 to 30,000 euros. Our rebuild in Uganda, there was the second rebuild, I think, were 24,000, mainly because of customs and so. But the main thing about this MRI scanner is that it's open source. Everything, so the entire hardware stack, even the card you use to roll it around, and the software can be found under this GitLab link. So if you want to build your own MRI scanner at home, this is the link to go. Yeah, and that also pushes MRI now in a realm where it wasn't imaginable before, simply because of cost. So the real applications are yet to be evaluated. Our goal is, of course, clinical scanning of patients in mainly rural areas, and also for remote diagnostics, so in the global south, where there's no MRI at all. But of course, there's also lower hanging fruits we can go to. for instance, veterinary medicine, so they're happy to get a picture at all. Any kind of industrial applications, you could scan eggs and see if they're fertilized. You can scan avocados and see if they're ripe. So there's a lot to explore. And at the moment, also a lot of research and education. For instance, AI research is benefiting a lot from that because we're suddenly having a reference system. So you can compare data and you can characterize the entire signal chain and see what happens if you interchange some of the modules. And on top of that, we also have a little prototyping platform. So the scanner scaled down, it's a lot easier to build. You can build it in your seminar room with students, but it works on the same technology and you can play around with different designs without having to run into the same issues when you scale something up. Yeah, so this sounds all great, but let's take a closer look into the technology and see how it works. The first question I always get is pictures. So can you see anything yet with it? It's ultra low field, right? So how low is the quality of the pictures you're getting? And here for reference is a comparison between a top-notch clinical system on the right with 3 Tesla and the field strength we are moving in with 55 millitesla. And if you zoom in a bit, you can see that on the right you see a little more details. But if you're trying to spot the tumor, it's pretty easy. And also with the advance of AI, it's really questionable how high the resolution will need to be for diagnostics in the future. What you can, of course, do already with low resolution is scanning knees or like all kinds of like larger structures. Here's a dead dog that was surprisingly easy to get. Or a developer brain, so you can see what's going on there. And the cool thing about that is that doesn't have any sort of AI filter on top or special calibration or so. Those are just the raw images that we get from version 1 of the scanner. So there's still a lot happening. And how does it work? And yeah, primarily, why is it so cheap? Why can we do it for 1% of the cost of usual MRI scanners? And I'm going to take the magnet as an example. So usual MRIs use superconductors, very large, expensive magnets that you pump up with an insane amount of electricity, and for them not to evaporate and stay superconducting, you need liquid helium, and that requires a dedicated infrastructure. So in the peak, the scanner is pulling something like 500 amperes. That's nothing that you plug into your at home. So all of these things make the MRI very expensive, immobile, and hard to replicate, especially in low and middle income country settings. So instead, we are using permanent magnets like fridge magnets, but a little bit stronger, in a special array. And it looks like that. So that is one of the rings of the cylinder. The right line marks north of the magnet, and then they come in this special arrangement that enhances the magnetic field towards the center and cancels us outside. And that is eventually enough for imaging. These rings are stuck onto each other to a cylinder, and every ring is a bit different. And if you have done everything right, then you can start with the so-called shimming, because even if you have worked with extreme perfection, there is imperfections also in the magnets. So you need to balance these imperfections out. Because for imaging, we're measuring these imperfections in parts per million. So there's, it's difficult, impossible to achieve that just with manual labor. So there's a little robot in the Mac that measures the field in the center. And then the data is put into the computer to a Python script that then tells you where you have to install extra magnets in these trays to balance these inequalities out. And this is already cool. But there's still lots of room for improvement. So for instance, the Technical University of Graz did one of the first forks of the magnet, or I think even the first fork of the magnet, and managed to 3D print the rings, which we didn't because we suffered from warping and all kinds of issues. But they did with a very cheap printer, and that was pushing the manufacturing cost of the rings down by 90%. So there's still room for even cheaper and mass production. Yeah, and now we're observing how the 3D printed magnet behaves over time, so if the field is stable enough. And if you really want more, there is a 7.5-hour recording of a build workshop. So if you want to dig into the electronics, that's the link to go. So now a bit of history and background. How could this happen? Was one of our founders a billionaire, or were we an angry spin-off of Siemens? No, in fact, the initiative was founded out of thin air. About 10 years ago, at a very large global MRI conference, there was just nothing more than the question, what if MRI scanners were open source? And in the room, like here, well, not like here, but in a similar room like that, the room split in two parties, one saying that MRIs cannot be done open source because they are far too complex for that. And another group of people said, well, that's actually true. Because they're so complex, it makes so much sense to do them open source, because then we can bring together the different experts from the fields. And those were the ones we were building onto. So those were the people of the hardcore. So first we needed to bring them together in a joint communication platform. Then we started with essential but yet controllable projects. So not the MRI, but modules of it. And made the ecosystem visible because it was a lot larger than we anticipated. People anticipated 0, but of course there's something. As for sovereign technology, our first communication channel was Slack because it was easy, but as you may know, Slack has this trend to continuously cut on your communication, so we couldn't access our own information anymore. Moved to Matrix, and now everything is better. This was the first machine we built, so that was the robot that you might have seen in the back that measures the magnetic field. So it's something we really need in the chain, but of course it's a lot easier to build and to replicate and to document than the entire scanner. And all of the design files and software, firmware was published open source, and then we got copies. Other universities and research centers that rebuilt the robot and then had their own incentive to also go the last mile to the end to build the scanner, because that's what you're going to use the robot for. And this is our first website, live. And apart from looking really cool, it communicated that we won't disappear in the next 5 years. We're here to stay, and we want to do it. And that really helped. We used the same website to map the ecosystem. So if you scroll here, you can scroll for a very long time. You see a lot of different MRI projects across the globe that people sent to us. We could review and then publish here. And that was, again, then the foundation for other projects we wanted to do, because we could show evidence that there's something going on. And with that, we could focus on growing and connecting with others. So to this day, our main business model, in a way, is decentralized development, meaning that our researchers and engineers develop these MRI modules as part of their research. And so it's inherently funded, and we're not relying on external funds in that sense. Other than that, we contributed to policy briefs to bring more attention to the entire field, and so also money. And in standards, because the whole field was new and it needed to be structured somehow. So those were one of the humble beginnings to test the signal chain, how you could do it with very low-key hardware, up to modules that you could just screw into the MRI scanner, and works to this day. Also from different universities across the globe, mainly Europe at this point still. And yeah, a policy brief that we wrote with the gathering of open science hardware. That's a very large scientific community in the open source hardware sector that was then distributed to ESA, NASA, and the UNESCO alphabet. And this is the first official standard for open source hardware. That, by the way, was also the very first standard published at the German National Standardization Body under an open source license. So anyone could see it and also fork it, which, by the way, is happening this year. So we're going for the second iteration. And then it finally happened. We could harvest our first fruits of the intense work, and we had the foundation for the next steps forward. So in March 2022, we could publish this blog post that the first MRI scanner is out and is, to this day, conducting clinical tests in a university clinic in Leiden in the Netherlands. And now, what's up is sustainable scaling. So now we can focus on the documentation and quality standards. People really want to build it, so we have to keep up with the quality of the documentation, so the source of the hardware. And yeah, sustainably scale the community, because they're coming together from all kinds of different countries and backgrounds. And then the big milestone in the future that we're already working on is the clinical certification, because without the certification, you're not allowed to distribute it as a medical device. And what's the point of that? And once that's done, we can look into the commercialization and sustainable long-term funding of the entire initiative. So as for documentation, we could now use the same standard we co-developed and have a so-called community-based conformity assessment body to make sure that things are actually open source and are documented to the degree that people can actually use it. So if you publish a PDF of a machine, that's nice, but nobody can build it. You need all kinds of files. So yeah, the initiative heavily relies on a healthy ecosystem, as you've seen. There's not a single institution that builds MRI scanners open source. It's a network of people for different modules. However, sometimes these modules come with very mixed documentation quality, so it's hard to replicate them. And also sometimes unreliable licensing, so no license at all or a non-commercial one. And with this conformity assessment body, we can develop and promote community-based standards for the technical documentation. And if you think that's great, we need reviewers. Yeah, if you fancy, it's also software. And we also, if you have a project that you want to submit, submit it to our reviewers. Well, the process works. So we see, this is a map I've created last week. So a current map, and you see the different replications going on in the world, and compared to, or like in reference that it takes about 1 year and serious commitment and tools and experts to build this scanner out of your own pockets, I find this actually quite impressive. So I was counting 20 scanners in 14 different countries, and that's only the scanners we know of. So of course people don't have to ask us permission to rebuild the scanner. For instance, the South Africa folks did it without talking to us. We just found them by coincidence, so there might be even more scanners out there. And with that, we also get an into everything developer community. We're working with people that are Dutch, German, Italian, Portuguese, Austrian, Paraguayan, Russian, Turkish, Indian, Canadian, South African, Japanese. We also, and confessions are very diverse, and at the end it really doesn't matter, because we conduct this project as like healthcare being a universal human need. So being something that everybody needs, it just makes sense to do it as a global community. Yeah, and that is pulled together by a bit of governance as well. Since 2 years we have a non-profit body in Germany, but of course it doesn't represent, like, it's not German concerns that go into the body. It's mainly there to own community assets like donations and also trademarks, and acts as a neutral platform for public funding projects, donations, but also for contracts with other parties if we want to interact with the rest of the world. So before it was really just a loose community of individuals, and now we have a legal body to be more professional, or like, to interact with the rest of the world. And that can be either for-profits or non-profits. The vision, however, is that we have a global network of organizations all under one common governance model, so not having Germany as the center of it all. And with that governance, we can also further develop standards and tests that we need for quality control. So this is a test phantom. It's a test body that you put into the tube to see the imaging quality. And on the left, you can see if you have done everything right in the build, the picture looks like that. And when you then go through the shimming process and balance out the imperfections, then you actually get to an image quality. And this is the basis then also for the medical certification that we want to make open source too, because otherwise it's just, again, a huge wall that you're standing in front of. There's a project going on for the medical design regulation in the European Union, so to make that open source for the scanner as far as it's legally allowed. And we're building on top of other initiatives that have done something similar already, mainly for software, mainly in the US, for the FDA. But nevertheless, it's a great structure to build onto. And our vision of that is that bureaucracy shouldn't be a blocker, that we get the paperwork done together and then distribute scanners. Yeah, if you think, why haven't I heard of it yet? That's great. Consider joining our PR team. Our PR is horrible. We're mainly engineers, researchers, we work and don't really talk about it. So if you want the world to know about it, please contact me. Yeah, back to our leading question. Who should own healthcare? And is an open source license enough? And here's my take for democratic technology. My hypothesis is that a core requirement is that the cost of change reflects in the representativeness of the governance model. Sounds very abstract. Here an example. So on the one end of the scale, low cost of change is, for instance, software that can be forked and maintained by anyone, very simple software. So if you do that, then the governance model doesn't really matter in practice so much, because even dictators would be forced to be benevolent. Anyone can fork it, right? So the conflict resolution, if you disagree in these software projects, is essentially that. If you don't like it, you move on. And so either as a maintainer, be good or become irrelevant in that sense. You can update it and roll out the better software for anyone. However, on the other end of the scale, the high cost of change, such as you cannot fork a house, if you have hardware for which replication needs special equipment and significant investments, that's very difficult to do. And then single design decisions can impact the replicability, maintainability, operation, and so on for entire regions. So we couldn't just invite Siemens to the table, it pays a lot for the seat, like at the Linux Foundation, for instance, because it wouldn't work. It would be very easy to dominate our design decisions. And similarly, you cannot just rely on an open ecosystem, because unequal resources to drive the development equal unequal representation then in the technology. And if we're developing for the Global South will very quickly disappear from that scheme. So we need a dedicated governance model to keep these dominant actors in place, so that conflict resolution looks much more like a community-based consensus. And my approach to do that, it's under heavy development, but approach nonetheless that I want to share for open reference technology. Here I have an open source project hosted by a nonprofit, and this nonprofit acts as sort of a standardization platform for the technology. And the platform ensures the representative and fair process of all. It owns community assets, trademarks, spin-offs, certification, consulting, and so on. And then the distribution can actually happen in the private market without a conflict of interest, because it's really just the deployment of that. This, on top of that, you can also certify the for-profit partners, so they could use the trademark or distribute scanners under the label open source imaging, or also gain voting rights. And the goal would be to establish something as commons public partnerships for public infrastructure. Yeah, so that was a lot. Little wrap up. On a personal level, what I want you to remember, what's the core point of the initiative. If you think or you find yourself with the question, would it be possible to make XYZ open source? Remember, open source works for MRIs. It will most likely also work for other things too. On a political side, I want to say sovereign tech will very likely not come in the form of proprietary products governed by for-profits. That didn't happen with Google, it didn't happen with Microsoft, and it also didn't happen for MRIs. So open source is a prerequisite for true resilience and accessibility, but the license is not enough. The governance matters more the higher the cost of change. And so we need community-governed institutions to facilitate that. Thank you very much.